more boring part. Again, as always, if you have any questions, feel free to stop me at any time. You can also chat if you want. Yeah, so I realized that we're probably moving pretty fast. So I decided to take a step back and sort of explain what diversity and biodiversity is. You guys probably have already heard of these terms, but basically we should look at the classification of life before looking at why they're different and what we actually base it off of. So this is just like the bigger picture, basically, yeah. So starting off with the classification of life, we call this area of study taxonomy. And so the second main bullet explains why it's called taxonomy. But basically, taxonomy is grouping life based on shared characteristics. So for example, humans and platypuses, they're both mammals. But then if you want to go more specific than that, then humans and apes are both primates. So you have mammals, which is broader, and then you have primates, which is more narrow. And that's how life is grouped based on these different scopes and these traits that we all share. So in general, we classify life on 7 levels. And so each of these levels or each of these groups are called taxonomy, hence, yeah. So the father of this modern classification system is Charles Linnaeus. I think that's how you pronounce it, but he discovered like a lot of famous organisms throughout the past, a lot of like famous fossils, and yeah, just like really that organisms that are studied a lot, he discovered and classified, he classified a lot of them using his system. And so these 7 levels, based on most broad to most narrow in terms of shared characteristics, are domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So there's a mnemonic for this. Unfortunately, I don't remember what it is, but if you just Google like taxonomy mnemonic, it should give you like DKPCOFGS, like a sentence in that order. If you want to memorize that, it's kind of cool if someone's just like, hey, do you know what the levels of life are? And you can be like, yeah, because I learned this mnemonic anyway. So looking at how we classify things, take for example a human. So on the diagram on the right, we have the different levels from most broad at the top and most specific at the bottom. So first of all, a human is alive, classified as life, not a virus, even though there's like debate about whether or not viruses are alive. That we'll get to the 5th week, I believe. And then so domains. So humans are domain eukarya, and we're going to look at domains and kingdoms more specifically in the next few slides. And so kingdom, humans are part of kingdom Animalia, so we are biologically animals. Phylum Chordata, which is all animals that have a notochord, but more specifically like a vertebrae, that would be like the subphylum that we belong to. Yes, taxonomy is very cool, and are those cherry emojis. Yeah, so our class that we share with platypuses, dogs, cats, rats, mammals, mammalia. The order we belong to, primates, a little bit more specific than mammals. The family we belong to are Hominidae, and then our genus and species is the scientific name for humans. So Homo sapiens is our scientific name. And so this kind of naming is binomial nomenclature. No, okay, yeah. So it's a species, and then you have the genus that it belongs to in the front, and then the species specific name second. And that was also invented by Carl Linnaeus. So like wolf is Canis lupus, and then Canis is like general, like canines. Yes. So the broadest classification group of life are domains. So there are 3 domains in total. And so this varies from like the thousands of species that exist in the world today. There are only 3 domains. So every single living thing can be classified into these 3 domains, one of them. So Eukarya is the domain that we belong to. And in this domain, organisms have eukaryotic cells. So there are 2 main types of cells, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. And that's what the second bullet thing is going to talk about. But eukaryotic cells, they have membrane-bound organelles. So that means they have these special areas within the cell that are protected by a membrane, which is like a biological barrier that can controls what goes in and out. And so this gives rise to higher compartmentalization and organization. So because you have these more complex cells, you usually find that eukaryotic organisms are more complex and they grow to be bigger. Like we are obviously bigger than bacteria, which have prokaryotic cells. So before we move into that, some examples of organelles would be the nucleus, where all of your genes and information for what the cell actually does is stored. Mitochondria, which is used for cellular respiration, which turns food into energy. And then so prokaryotic domains, on the other hand, have no membrane-bound organelles. So their DNA and their genes are just like floating in this space that is the cell, and they don't have order. Well, they do have order, but they don't have like this advantage of compartmentalization and this complexity. So you'll find that they're usually only unicellular. And so that means the organisms are one-celled. And so prokarya is not a domain, but within like this group of prokaryotic organisms, there are 2 domains, bacteria and archaea. So bacteria and archaea were originally classified into 1 domain, which would just be a prokaryotic domain, but there are actually a lot of differences, usually on the cellular, like small macromolecule interaction cell levels, really small levels. And so we found that they're different. How they're actually different is on the next slide, I believe. Yeah. Okay. So the 3 domains are again eukarya, which we belong to, eubacteria. So sometimes bacteria is called eubacteria, which means true bacteria, and archaea is called archaebacteria, which means like not true bacteria. No, it doesn't mean that, but basically archaebacteria is just not eubacteria, which is true bacteria. And so the main differences are eukarya have eukaryotic cells, and then the other 2 have prokaryotic cells, and then histones. Histones are something that histones are like proteins that regulate DNA. You don't need to learn that at all for this course, maybe eventually in life. But these are just like a list of differences between the 3 kingdoms and why, even though they may all just look like tiny little weird slime things, they're actually different and we classify them differently. So the kingdoms. So there are 6 kingdoms, and so there are 4 in domain eukarya. So kingdoms are the next step down, and there are more than 3, so it's a more specific classification. So in domain eukarya, there are 4: fungi, plants, animals, and protista, or protists. Their scientific names are fungi, plantae, animalia, and protista. So far we've covered plants and fungi, but these 4, they are classified differently based on their structure and like their niche, which is what role they occupy in an ecosystem, and how they obtain food mostly. So fungi are usually decomposers or parasites, which essentially harm the host for your own benefit. Heterotrophs, which means that they don't make their own food. Yeah, they depend on other organisms for food. And then on the other hand, plants, they are autotrophs. They make their own food through photosynthesis. And then animals are also heterotrophs. They don't make their own food. Protists. So protists are kind of weird because they are classified based on what they're not. So my bio teacher actually just talked about this today, but protists are sometimes called the trash group. So when you get a eukaryotic organism, you know it's a eukaryote. You've seen the organelles within the cells, but then you're like, this isn't fungi or plants or animals. Then it's probably, or no, it is a protist. Protists are just basically anything that's not fungi, plants, and animals. And so within this protist group, you don't actually find a lot of shared characteristics because they're not a narrow group. They're just like really dispersed, and sometimes protists are like more related to fungi and other protists are more related to animals, and it's just really messy. But yeah, and so the other kingdoms are just the domains. There's not like special kingdoms within each, but there are like tinier classifications, but not smaller kingdoms. Yeah, again, Archaea used to be classified with bacteria, but there were a lot of differences, as we saw. Also, another thing to note is that even though you have these 7 levels, sometimes you'll find a group that's like doesn't follow any of these classifications, and that can be called a clade. And a clade, I'll type it into the chat. A clade is just basically like a group of organisms based on something, but it doesn't have to be one of these 7 levels. Okay, so now actually on to the protists. So again, protists are part of kingdom Protista. They are every eukaryote that is not a fungi, an animal, or a plant. And so they are usually unicellular. So going down to the bottom bullet, they are usually unicellular. However, there are protists with multiple cells, but all of them are eukaryotic. But then because they're unicellular, they don't have these mechanisms to absorb water like we do. And plants do. Plants have roots. Fungi have roots that are called hyphae that we went over last time. We drink water and have all these mechanisms for retaining water, our skin, sweat. But then protists are less complicated than that because they are one cell, so they need to live in watery environments to be able to get water, which is again essential to all life. So we have a special term for like being a trash group. It's called polyphyletic. So that means that there are no shared characteristics among every member of this group. So if there were shared characteristics, so animals, Animalia, kingdom Animalia would be a monophyletic group. But then polyphyletic is like a bunch of different sources. Monophyletic, everyone has some like aspect that is shared. So I don't know. Okay, yeah. So we go over the actual parts on the next slide. But then, so looking at the diagram on the top right, these are just a couple of the features that help protists still get nutrients. And yeah, so you also see a bunch of different types of protists in the bottom right. So there are slime molds, amoeba, famous protist, euglena. Okay, I am terrible with this. Okay, dinoflagellite, paramecium, diatom, macroalga. Alga. That's like something related to algae, because yeah. If we have time at the end, I will tell you guys a very sad story about dinoflagellates that still haunts me to this day. But yeah, okay. So, protist structure. It's more structurally diverse than any other eukaryotic group because, again, it's not monophyletic. There's not a shared trait, so it's diverse. There are a lot of different eukaryotes. Again, so most are unicellular, so their parts are just going to be the organelles of the cell. So we'll look at that after I go through the last few bullets. So they also make food in a lot of different ways. So some of them might be photoautotrophs, which means that they make their own food from light. Some of them might be heterotrophs. Again, that means that they don't make their own food, they get it from other organisms. Mixotrophs actually have a mix of making their own food and also getting food from other sources. So it's really, if you had to describe protists in one word, it would be diverse in terms of their species, members, structure, mode of feeding. It's just very diverse. So looking at the actual diagram on the right, so Euglena, I am sorry for butchering this pronunciation probably, but so this is a protist that performs photosynthesis. So it is an autotroph, just like plants. They make their own food from light. So that's because they have chloroplasts. So chloroplasts are the thing in cells that actually helps get the sunlight and turn it into food. They turn it into glucose, which is sugar, which is our main source of energy and food throughout life, I guess. As you can see, you have membranes. Okay, wait, one thing. Okay, yeah. So you have membranes, Golgi apparatus. If you guys don't know what any of these mean and you want me, oh wait, no, let me explain flagellum and photoreceptor and stigma, because that's not like well known. So flagellum is like, it's essentially a long microtubule thing. Microtubules are just like a mix of different molecules from the cytoskeleton of the cell, and the cytoskeleton helps maintain cell structure. So the flagella helps the protist move across various substances, and it's like a propeller. The stigma is just basically a really pigmented area within the cell that helps with absorbing light. Same with the photoreceptor, it also aids in like this light collection. Contractile vacuoles are so vacuoles are like storage areas within the cell. So animals don't have them, plants have them, and plants use them to like store water, food, nutrients, and protists use the contractile vacuole for the same thing. And then chloroplasts, photosynthesis, yeah, I already said that. Some protists also have something called a pellicle, which is like an armor that protects it from outside damage. So that's kind of like this cell wall in terms of function, definitely not structure, but in plants, usually not. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yeah, but if you guys want me to explain anything right now, just tell me. Otherwise, I will move on. Any of the other ones. Okay. I'm going to assume that we are all extremely proficient in protein structure. Okay, so looking at major protist groups, I believe there are 5 major protist groups. Might be Archaea. Wait, Hang on. Okay, anyway, just moving down the line. There are a few major protist groups. Again, these are not official taxas in any way. They are not part of the 7 lines because, again, protists are kind of an arbitrary group of organisms. So, even like the fact that we even have classifications within the protist group is really impressive. So our first group is Excavata. So these protists are grouped together based on the structure or morphology of the cytoskeleton. So again, the cytoskeleton of the cell helps it maintain its shape and structure. So some of the members of group Excavata have a excavated feeding groove on one side. So that's why they're called Excavata. And I think it's like kind of like this arching out. So there are 3 main groups within the excavated group. You don't need to remember this by all means. I don't even remember it. I probably should. But yeah, okay, so diplomonads have no mitochondria. Instead, they have these modified things called mitosomes. So something to keep in mind, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. So it creates energy, yeah. And so when you have these reduced mitochondria, so mitochondria takes oxygen. Wait, no, okay, sorry, we don't need to go over that. So 2 equally sized nuclei and multiple flagella are another trait of the diplomonads. Yeah, so if you're wondering what the image on the side is, it's not specific to one of these 3 groups, but instead it just shows the structure of an excavata. You see like these multiple tail thingies and like that groove. Yeah, so the second main group are parabasalids. And so they have reduced mitochondria called hydrogenosomes. I'm not good at pronunciation, but the point is that usually cellular respiration usually releases CO2, but instead these release hydrogen gas. And the euglenozoans, which is what euglena is part of. Thank you for telling euglena. Yeah, euglena. Wait, I think that's what Caleb said. They are an extremely diverse group, but they all have a rod inside of the flagella. The rod can be shaped spiral or crystalline. So, major protist groups. Part 2. Chromalveolates. Yeah. So they're the second group. They are grouped based on DNA. Their common ancestor basically engulfed a red algae cell, which is called endosymbiosis, which formed a plastid. A plastid is a kind of organelle, and it's just basically pigmented. A pigmented organelle is a plastid. So in this case, the pigment would be red because the algae was red. And so within this group, we have 2 more groups, aviolates, which they have membrane-bound sacs called alveoli, hence their name. We don't know what these sacs are actually used for yet. There's been hypotheses like metabolism or storage or such, but scientists are still trying to figure it out. And then the second major group of chromaviolates are stramenopiles. And so their flagella they have 2 flagellas. So one of the flagellas are really long, And so that one has like hair, and then the shorter one doesn't have hair. So it's like, yeah, kind of whack. And then rhizarians. These are my favorite, not famous. These are my favorite protists. So please treat them with respect. But they're also based on DNA similarities. These include the amoebas, famous protists. Yeah, these are famous protists. They move by things called fake feet, pseudopodia. Literally, if we look at what this word means, it means fake feet. And then so these also include the radiolarians, which have an internal skeleton made out of silica, and also foraminiferans. They have these calcium carbonate shells. So calcium carbonate also gives rise to limestone. So yeah, foraminiferans are my favorite protists. And then you also get your cercozoans, which they also have fake feet, but they're more thread-like, so more thin than the amoeba. So, oh no, what did I do? Okay, wait, no, wait, there we go. So on the right, the chromaviolates are at the top. You see the longer flagella and then the shorter one, and then on the right, you see that you are looking at the test of a foraminiferan. So last slide for major protist groups, you have the Archaeplastida. So these protists are photosynthetic. So Archaeplastida isn't actually just a protist group, but they contain land plants, red algae, and green algae. So the latter two, red algae and green algae, they're protists. But then the land plants, obviously not a protist, they're plants. So this is a super group, Archaeplastida. And so all of these organisms, they are believed to have evolved from an ancestor that ate a cyanobacteria. A cyanobacteria, one of the oldest organisms on Earth, they actually performed photosynthesis and they contributed to the but the rise of the Great Oxidation Event, which is something that gave rise to a lot of oxygen in the atmosphere and allowed us and other more complex animals to evolve. So after they ate the cyanobacteria, they could perform photosynthesis and make their own food. So two major groups of Archaeplastida, red algae. So red algae are just basically algae that is red because of something called phycoerythrin. Yeah. Yeah. I just said yeah like 4 times. Okay. Anyway, so green algae, so they have chloroplasts, and chloroplasts have this green pigment, so they appear green, and so their chloroplasts are very similar to the chloroplasts you found in plants. So just remember that this whole group can perform photosynthesis. And then finally, the last Archaea group, sorry, yeah, no, okay, no, we are not on Archaea yet. The last protist group, oh my god, okay. All right, guys, we're back in it. Okay, the final protist group is Uniconta. And so there are two major groups of Unicontas, and so their relationship is connected by comparing the structure and overall function of their myosin proteins. Myosin is a protein found in the cytoskeleton in muscles, overall very key player in the body of organisms, and also just various specific genes in the genome. So there are two major groups, and amoebozoans are the first one. So they have lobe or tubey pseudopodia. So they include the slime molds, So plasmodial slime molds, just these like masses of cells. Second group is opisthokonts. So this is kind of like Archaea plastida in that it's not limited to protists. So it includes protists, but it's actually a clade. So it's a group of organisms based on a shared characteristics, and it includes animals, plants, fungi, and several protist groups. And so their shared characteristic is that, you know how you see like those diagrams of sperm and then you just have like a little tail on the end. And so the shared trait is that the sperm cells of all of these organisms, their little tail is always on like the rear end. So you'll never find it like in the head, and it's always going to be like in the rear. So that's their shared traits. They have flagella that's positioned posteriorly. And so on the right, in the bottom, that one, that diagram shows all of the opisthokonts and the different organisms found in that. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to Archaea finally. So Archaea, remember they are domain. They are a domain. The domain Archaea includes unicellular prokaryotes, which we went over. Again, used to be classified with bacteria. So for example, some of their differences are bacteria and Archaea, they both have cell walls, but they're made out of different things. For bacteria, it's made out of a special compound called peptidoglycan. But then in Archaea, it's just made out of like random protein. Well, not random, but like miscellaneous proteins and lipids. There's no special compounds. But then all of the biological methane in the atmosphere is a direct result of methanogens, Archaea. Yeah. So Archaea love extreme environments. So that's why it's really hard to study them, and we don't know that much about them. They live in environments where it's either super hot, freezing, acidic, basic, salty, deep in the ocean, lots of gamma and UV radiation, which is very impressive because if we went into those conditions, we would not survive, which is why we can't study Archaea as much as we do all the other organisms. So we don't know the most about them. So again, they are unicellular prokaryotes. So this just means that their structure is just the structure of a prokaryotic cell. There's nothing special. So some things to go over here. The cap, wait, I can annotate. Wow, this is so cool. Okay. So why is it in white? Draw, how do I change the color? Okay. So the capsule or slime layer is something that's especially unique to bacteria and Archaea. So this just means that you have like an outer layer of these like fats and proteins that serve as extra protection. So they don't have a nucleus because a nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle. So instead they have something called the nucleoid region or nucleolus. Or no, not nucleolus, just the nucleoid where all the DNA is found. They have pili, which are these tiny hairs that increase the surface area, and so that increases the absorption. You have food granules, which are just food nutrient storage sites, ribosomes, which are places where you make proteins. And then you have this flagellum, which is exactly the same as the Archaea flagellum and other flagellums. But yeah, so they also have sometimes these circular chromosomes called plasmids. I think this is mostly found in bacteria, but like circular, and it's really good for like genetic transplanting and genetic engineering because they're like easy to cut and they're circular. So this would be like the cuts, and then you have scissors. Yeah, beautiful drawings, clear out drawings. How do I get out of this mode? Okay, there we go. So major groups of Archaea. these are definitely way less formal than any of the other ones we looked at. Extremophiles, exactly what it sounds like. They love extreme conditions. Extreme halophiles, they love salt. Halobacterium are a specific kind of archaea. They can't live if the salinity of their environment is less than 9%. And for a comparison, seawater is only 3.5%. I'm pretty sure the Dead Sea is like, the Dead Sea is like 12% maybe. But the reason why it's called the Dead Sea is because no organisms are found there because it's too salty. But then like bacteria, sorry, not bacteria, archaea love these salty environments. Extreme thermophiles love hot environments. They live in deep sea vents, hot springs, etc. Methanogens, they release methane as a byproduct of obtaining energy, and most of them are poisoned by oxygen. So that's why they live under like swamps and marshes where oxygen is usually consumed by the organisms above. And so you just have like this layer of methane gas, marsh gas, and that's methane produced by archaea. So together, methanogens and a lot of halophiles, which are salt-loving, they make up clade Archaeota. And then, so some thermophiles also go into that group, but most of them go into clade Archaeota. So these are more formal groups than just extremophiles. And then, so you also have Archaeota, which are the oldest living organisms on Earth. And again, they're pretty similar to the structure of the previous two. Nanoarchaeota, they have the smallest genomes ever of only about 500 base pairs. So compared to us, who we have like thousands, hundreds of thousands. They only have 500. And then Taumarchaeota, I think that's how you pronounce it. They oxidize ammonia, which is a key role in the nitrogen cycle, which is one of the key biological cycles on Earth. The other ones being like carbon, water, carbon, water, phosphorus, etc. Okay, that was a lot of stuff.